What's up Sega fans and SNK fans, it's Dan the Mega Driver of the SEGAGuys here with another video. Regular viewers lately would have noticed that James the Segaholic and I have been thoroughly enjoying our Saroos in our Sega Saturns, to the point where they've become our daily driver in our consoles, leaving our Fenrir powered systems a little bit in the cold. As anyone who has listened to the podcast on the Saroo will know, one of my biggest surprises was how certain SNK games performed when used on the Saroo, with Metal Slug being the first to really wow me. With that in mind, in this video I'll be looking at a handful of SNK games on the Sega Saturn and seeing how they perform across Saroo, Fenrir and, where available, good old fashioned compact disc. Does every game on Saroo see a benefit? Let's take a look. Why SNK, you might ask? Well, as something of a fighting game enthusiast, I wanted to see if Saroo's load times were massively improved on 2D brawlers. As you can see here, Street Fighter Alpha 2 didn't really yield too much by way of improvements, which seemed pretty typical of Capcom's games to be honest, including those that support the 4MB expanded RAM card. For SNK though, the load times in some games were immediately noticeably better, as we shall see.
World Heroes Perfect.
We're going to start off with World Heroes Perfect because SNK's Oddball Fighter, featuring infamous historical figures, does not use any RAM expansion whatsoever. That said, load times weren't actually too egregious originally, with only one big load screen at the start and then slight pauses after each match. But they are still there, lasting a few seconds on both Fenrir and using my original disc. It seems that Fenrir closely mimics the disc access times, as the pauses on the ODE lined up with when I heard the drive on my disc version, which makes sense, considering that Fenrir is of course a drive emulator. Saroo however removes all of the loading. As you can see, loading is pretty much instantaneous. It is literally like playing the arcade version, and you wouldn't think that you're playing this on a disc-based system at all, because I guess you aren't with the Saroo. Anyway, just look at these side-by-side comparisons.
Hanzo versus Round 1, fight! Hanzo versus Round 1, fight!
The next game we're going to talk about also doesn't use the expanded RAM card. This is Fatal Fury 3, or to give it its Japanese name, Garou Denset Road to Final Victory, and it also shows hugely improved load times. Without Saroo, we can see the loading animation at nearly every screen, sometimes for prolonged periods. The footage on this occasion is all captured from Fenrir, since I don't actually own the physical version of this game. On Saroo, we see those loading screens for a fraction of a second. In fact, if you didn't get that flash between menus, you probably wouldn't notice any loading at all. Loading does still last a few seconds before actual fights, but it's a fraction compared to the whopping 20 seconds when playing from another ODE, or from the disc version. It's not quite instant like World Heroes Perfect, but it's a huge improvement, making playing this game that much more like an arcade experience.
Carry 1. Okay. Southtown Airport. Go!
Next, we're on to the 1MB expanded RAM supported games, but we'll stick to Fatal Fury. First off is Real Bout Garou Densetsu. The game initially loads with a 3-second loading bar, and then there's no loading between the option screens like there is in Fatal Fury 3. However, there are still substantial loading times between matches, with loads being around 15 seconds each. That's better than the previous game, and the more complete animation and improved game performance makes Real Bout a huge step up with the 1MB RAM card. Performance is largely the same whether playing from disc or from Fenrir from what I've seen. However, Saroo once again absolutely decimates the other versions of the game. The initial load screen takes less than a second, and once you're past that, fights load in just under 3 seconds. Just like the previous game, while it's not arcade perfect, the load times provide a huge boost and make playing through this fighting game so much more enjoyable. Of course, we follow up Real Bout with Real Bout Special. We get the loading splash on Special that lasts about 8 seconds on disc. Loading the character select is another 9 seconds, and then it's 14 seconds before each match. Again, this is largely aligned between Fenrir and CD, and again, this is so much improved on Saroo. The initial load is less than a second, and then you're looking at around 2 seconds to get into the player selection, and then less than 3 seconds to get into every fight. This is truly a transformative impact on the game.
Okay. Next battle versus Terry USA. Let's party! Round. Fight! Banyaku!
So at this stage, I guess it's point made, right? Well, Saroo is certainly dominating so far, but it's worth noting that, during testing, I was greeted by these visual artifacts on Saroo. These will be familiar to anyone that has tried to play these games with a 4MB expanded RAM cart as opposed to the 1MB cart that they were developed around, and are a result of that incompatibility. I'm not sure what caused it, whether Saroo has set the wrong extended RAM functionality in place for these games, and I've certainly seen it with other carts such as Action Replay and Sega Saturn. As with those devices, it can be resolved by resetting or power cycling your console. As I said, it's not something specific to Saroo, but it can happen and is certainly a consideration when using the Saroo cart instead of an official 1MB RAM expansion card. Okay, on to the next game, Metal Slug. This is the title that prompted this video and is an interesting one as it's the only non-fighting game in these comparisons. On disc, you get a 10-second initial load and a further 8-second load before each level begins. This was, quite honestly, a revelation back in the 90s, with loading that was much faster than on the Sony PlayStation and didn't feature any of that port's mid-game loading. It was even faster than SNK's own Neo Geo CD version, though obviously well behind the original MVS and AES systems. On Saroo, however, that initial load lasts for just over a second, and each stage from then on just takes 2 seconds to load. This gives you a near arcade-like experience, and if those loading bars didn't flash up between stages, you'd be forgiven for thinking that there was no loading at all. Is it any wonder that when I first played this on Saroo, I was so blown away? The next two games are ones that I do not own the physical disc for, but both come from the same series and use the 1MB RAM cart. We'll start with Samurai Spirit's Zenkuro Musoken, or Samurai Shodown 3 as the game is known in the West. There doesn't appear to be a loading splash, the game just jumps straight into the intro, and from there you can navigate through the options and into the character select without any delay. However, when the fight begins, you get a please wait screen which sits there for around 10 seconds. And once again we get a similar story on Saroo. Those please wait loading screens only appear for around 2 seconds, and like the other games, if there was no loading splash screen, you could be fooled into thinking there's no loading at all. Samurai Spirit's Amakusa Kurin, or Samurai Shodown 4, changes things up a bit. There's a loading splash here. On Fenrir, that took about 10 seconds to get through, and then there's 12 seconds for the first match to start. After that though, the following matches only take 6 seconds to load in. Does Saroo make a huge difference? Well, for the first time in this video, the results are kinda mixed. Yes, there are improvements, but for this game, they're not as pronounced. The first load screen lasts for 7 seconds, so is only 3 seconds faster. Once you beat your first opponent, the following matches all load rapidly compared to Fenrir at 2 seconds. But given that the game on Fenrir loads in 6, it's not a massive gain. The big win, however, is on the first match, which takes just 3 seconds to load compared to Fenrir's 12. I have a theory as to why we're not seeing such a big gain on this game, but we'll come on to that later. Now, onto the big ones, the King of Fighters. This series on console is one of my favourites, but the ports are somewhat notorious for their loading, whether on PlayStation, Neo Geo CD or Sega Saturn. I'm only covering 96 and 97 here. 95, with its ROM cart, was problematic for a number of reasons, but hopefully I'll be able to cover that in a video down the line. We're going to start then with 96. We see some differences in the boot between Fenrir and CD at 9 seconds on the ODE compared to 11 on disc, but after that things line up between the two. The first match takes 13 seconds to load on both, with the next fighter in the team taking 6 seconds to load in, and that is generally the pattern. 13 seconds to load a new stage, 6 seconds for a new fighter. Saroo absolutely obliterates these load times. The initial boot may only yield a modest improvement of 7 seconds, but after that, stages take 3 seconds to load in, and a new fighter, just 1. It's an absolutely stunning improvement, and once again, I'm lamenting loading screens appearing at all, especially since they break up the amazing soundtrack.
Hey, come on, come on.
97 meanwhile is a little different, and so I approached that slightly differently. When I was testing 96, not only were Fenrir load times about the same as on disc, as was almost every other game, but I did get the old 4MB graphical corruption when using my Action Replay card. So I switched it up. I use the patched version on Fenrir which supports the 4MB RAM card to see if that made a difference. That said, King of Fighters 97 supported the 4MB card at retail, so I was interested to see the patch's results. Booting it up, Fenrir actually came in the fastest at 10 seconds. Saroo was just behind at 12 and the disc version came in at a whopping 16 seconds. Yeah, I remember looking at that load screen very well. However, we soon fall into a similar rhythm to 96. New stages take 13 seconds to load on both disc and Fenrir, with new fighters taking 5 seconds to load. Saroo doesn't enjoy the near instant load times that it did in 96 here. The first match takes 6 seconds to load, which is a big improvement, but the additional fighters take 3 seconds to load, which is only a 2-second saving on the other two. While not the monumental improvement we've seen elsewhere, it's still something of a welcome one.
Round 2. Ready, go! Crack!
So, those are the games that I had tested. In most of them, Saroo produced simply transformational results with load times that felt near instant. Of the two games that didn't show dramatic improvements in load times, both Samurai Shodown 4 and the King of Fighters 97 support the 4MB RAM card in addition to the 1MB one. This leads me to believe that games that use that expansion cart access the drive image in a different way, and that would explain why games such as Street Fighter 03 and X-Men vs Street Fighter also didn't yield significant improvements on Saroo. This also seemed to persist with Capcom's other games, the very small improvements on Street Fighter Alpha 2 being an example. But that doesn't take away from the game-changing improvements on SNK's games here, especially those that use the 1MB RAM card. Some of these feel like they're pretty much arcade perfect, and others simply make the whole experience so much better without so many pauses and waiting. Of course, you can play these today emulated or on modern consoles, but there's something special about playing these Sega Saturn ports, especially with those arranged soundtracks. They were already superior to their PS1 cousins, and quite often also to the Neo Geo CD versions, and Saroo only elevates them even further, which makes Saroo essential for SNK fans. While James and I have previously tempered our recommendations on Saroo versus other ODE options, for me, if you love these games like I do, Saroo is a must-have. But hey, what do you think? Hopefully this has been entertaining and informative, and if you've enjoyed this content, please give us a like and a subscribe, as that really helps the channel. And until next time, we will see you on the Sega side.